We'll now recognize our second panel of witnesses. We have with us today Mr. Alan Chvotkin, who is the Senior Vice President of the Professional Services Council. We have Mr. Mark Renaud, who is a partner at the national law firm of Wiley & Rain. We have Ms. M.L. Mackey, who is the CEO of Beacon Interactive Systems and the Vice Chair of the Small Business Division of the National Defense Industrial Association. And of all the businesses that raised this issue with our committee, Ms. Mackey was the only one that wanted to testify today. All the others cited fears of reprisals, so we thank you very much for coming, Ms. Mackey. We also have Lori Hollingsworth, who is the President of Asset Recovery Technologies Incorporated and is testifying on behalf of the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce. We have Ms. Marion Blakey, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Aerospace Industries Association, and Mr. Brad Smith, who is a former Federal Election Commission Chairman and is Professor of Law at Capital University Law School. Pursuant to the committee rules, we have to swear in all of the witnesses, all of you today, so if you'll please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you very much. Please be seated. In order to allow time for discussion, I'd ask that you please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. But your entire written testimony will obviously be made a part of the record. And we'll start with you, Mr. Chvotkin. And again, I want to thank all of the witnesses for coming today. I appreciate it very much. I am looking forward to your testimony. But Mr. Chvotkin.
Chairman Graves and Mr. Issa, members of the two committees, thank you for your invitation and the opportunity to testify at this joint hearing. So there's no mistake about the Professional Services Council as opposed to the draft executive order in its current form, and we hope that it will not be issued. Political contributions currently are not and should not be disclosed as part of the bidding and source selection process for Federal contract awards. Yet the draft executive order takes the ill-conceived approach of injecting that very information into the contracting process, forcing all bidders for Federal contracts to collect and disclose that information as part of their bid. Furthermore, only those competing for Federal contracts are covered by this draft order. We are not aware of any action that has been taken elsewhere to cover other entities, or even the Federal employees who are source decision makers for those Federal procurements. Singling out Federal contractors adds its own political tinge to the draft order. The first paragraph of Section 1 of the draft order spells out the policy foundation. We fully endorse those statements. They spell out a necessary and appropriate requirement that is, and in our view must be, at the very heart of the Federal contracting process. Today, no information about campaign contributions or other political activity is ever asked to be presented to a contracting officer or other source selection official. I doubt that any procurement official has done her own research into publicly available campaign contributions to aid them in their source selection. But if there is that concern, rather than insulating contracting officers from this tainted information, this draft order requires every bidder for a Federal contract to affirmatively disclose that information, and further provides that making the required disclosure is a condition of award. For us, this is not a question of disclosure of political contributions. It is a question of the linkage to the Federal procurement process. The first paragraph of Section 2 of the draft order requires a certification that disclosure of this information has been made, and the FAR Council is given authority to establish the manner in which that certification is made. It's not clear whether the draft order also gives the FAR Council the flexibility to determine the nature of the certification required. Certifications have special importance in the Federal procurement system. Typically and ideally, where they are required, they should be made subject to the certifier's best knowledge and belief, where the contractor is dependent on obtaining information from others in order to make the necessary certification. Second, there should be some method for the bidder to be able to identify areas outside the contractor's control where the certification cannot be made, such as when a contributor refuses to provide the relevant information to a bidding entity. Section 2 of the order also requires the disclosure of two types of contributions. The first is contributions to Federal candidates. Like the discussion, while that is publicly available, today companies are not now required to collect this information. Once the contributions are made, it is the recipient of the contribution that makes the disclosure, not these companies. We also have concerns about the threshold that has been established because the bidder still has to collect the information in order to know whether the aggregate exceeds the $5,000 threshold in the executive order. The second type of contribution to third-party entities with the intent or reasonable expectation that those parties would use the contribution to make independent expenditures. None of these contributions have been, as discussed today, are now subject to reporting. Yet the draft order uses an undefined standard of reasonable expectation whose interpretation may vary, thus undercutting the value of the information. Further, by adding a requirement that the bidder ascertain from the contributor whether she was aware of the intent of the third party or had reasonable expectation of the likely use of the contribution, the bidding entity would have to further pry into the contributor's knowledge of the actions of the third-party recipient. Where the reporting requirements are not duplicative of existing reporting requirements, they would still impose a heavy information collection and compliance burden on contractors that does not exist today. PSC is opposed to this draft order and recommends that it not be issued. This type of political information has been intentionally kept out of source selection to ensure a merit-based evaluation and award process, but the order would make its disclosure a condition of award. While the purpose of this order is to prevent pay-to-play contracting seen in some State procurement environments, the result will be to create the very pay-to-play environment on the Federal level where none exists today. Thank you for the opportunity to present these comments. I look forward to any questions you may have.